Hello, I'm Ken Daly, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Corporate Directors. Thanks for joining us at this episode of NACD's BoardVision. Today I'm joined by Cindy Fornelli, Executive Director of the Center for Audit Quality. And before we get started today, Cindy, would you just tell us a little bit about the Center for Audit Quality?
I'm happy to, Ken, and thanks so much for having me here today. We're very pleased at the CAQ with our partnership with NACD, so this is a great opportunity for us. So the Center for Audit Quality is a public policy organization based in Washington, D.C., and we focus on policy issues that affect public company auditors and those that interact with auditors. So, of course, the audit committee community is an important constituency for us. And as we take these issues, we try to get the perspectives not only of audit committees, but preparers, educators, investors, regulators, the whole range of stakeholders that have an interest in public company auditing.
Well, thanks. We have had a lot of collaborative efforts with the Center for Audit Quality, and this just happens to be the most recent one. And it's all about a collaboration and a white paper entitled Enhancing the Audit Committee Report, a Call to Action. And we're very, very happy to collaborate with the Center for Audit Quality on this project because we think it is, in fact, very important. The NACD and investors generally believe that audit committees are, in fact, doing a very fine job. What we're about to talk about today, and I'd like you to keep this in mind, and Cindy, you tell me if I've got this correct, is that this white paper is not recommending any additional responsibilities for the audit committee, nor is it recommending additional work for the audit committee. Do I have that right, Cindy?
You do, and that's a really key point, a critical point about this call to action or this initiative is that it's really more about communicating to investors and the marketplace the important work that that audit committees do, and not asking them to do more work. So we've really found that there are some who misunderstand what audit committees do, who don't get a full picture of the good work that audit committees do. And so we think that this call to action, as an audit committee goes through and looks at the various types of communications that they could have with investors, will help clear up some of that misunderstanding.
Well, I think that's a good point because, as I said at the top, NACD and the investor community generally believes that audit committees are really doing a fine job. But I think what this call to action is all about is to tell the public more about the audit committee's deliberations and the work that they've actually undertaken. Now, the important part of this is it's emerging or next steps that we see, and it is not about anything that's being mandated. It's all voluntary kinds of matters that we're talking about, and I think that's important to keep in mind. The white paper has a number of recommendations. I've chosen 3 of them here that I think are particularly germane. One is for the audit committee to have a robust discussion in the report about the factors that the audit committee considers when selecting an audit firm or the lead partner. Second, those key factors that the audit committee considers when compensating the external auditor. And the third one that I've chosen is providing relevant information about how the audit committee oversees the external audit process. So this is way more than what's going to be found in the charter, because the charter normally sets out what the committee thinks is its responsibilities or how it views its responsibilities. And now what we're talking about in this call to action is a more robust discussion about how they actually do the work.
That's right. I think that's right. And you've hit on what I think are the 3 key calls to action, if you will. And a couple of points. One, I do want to reiterate that this is not meant to be a mandate for audit committees. Rather, it's a list of discussion points that we think audit committees should consider at this particular time, whether or not it makes sense for that audit committee to have those discussions in the audit committee report. We hear more and more from investors that they want to have interaction with the audit committee because the audit committee represents the interests of investors, but there's really no mechanism to do that. So I think that the audit committee report is the best vehicle to do that. But on the 3 issues that you've selected out of the entire document, the reason that those are so critical is because of, after Sarbanes-Oxley, it's the Audit Committee's responsibility to oversee the work of the independent or the external auditor. And so those are the 3 critical components that I think are really important. And while audit committees do that, they don't talk about how they do that. They don't talk about even that they do that.
That seems to me to be the key, to be able to talk about how they actually do it. But here's a tough question, and forgive me for a particularly tough question, but what's in it for the audit committees?
Well, I'll tell you what's in it for the audit committee. Not only is it a best practice and it's good to have that communication, but on a more practical basis, you are seeing more and more regulatory pressure by either U.S. regulators as well as European regulators in trying to insert themselves and oversee the work of audit committees, even if they don't have jurisdiction.
Intrusion into the boardroom, specifically the audit committee room.
Well, I was trying to be a little more diplomatic than that, but yes, exactly. And so you've seen it with proposals like mandatory firm rotation, where the PCAOB came forward with the concept release talking about that, which I think usurps the role of the audit committee. You see it with the current proposal right now on the auditor's reporting model. You see it with the engagement partner identification even, where these are things where it really should be the audit committee overseeing the auditor's work in that area and not the PCAOB inserting themselves and overseeing the work of the audit committee. So I think, as you started with, having people understand the good work that audit committees do through discussions in the audit committee report is an easy, painless, cost-effective, let's say cost-neutral way to have more of that transparency into what happens.
I can't even figure out what the costs would be. What would be the added costs for something like
I don't
this?
think there should be any costs, frankly. I suppose you could have an audit committee that would like to have legal review of these disclosures, but in the call to action, we give real live examples of companies who have done this type of discussion in their audit committee report. And when we've talked to corporate secretaries and outside legal counsel, they all say that this is perfectly fine and acceptable disclosure that should raise no red flags or no liability issues for audit committees or even auditors, frankly.
Well, the way I see it, the audit committees are doing a good job. And I think what we're suggesting here is, why don't we tell the public about it? Because I think there's a risk when someone is thinking about what the audit committees are doing, if it's not laid out in some kind of detail, then there could be a presumption, inaccurate I believe, that in fact the audit committees are not doing the job. So I think what we're doing is merely suggesting that they put down on a piece of paper something that describes how it's being done. Now, I think it's equally important as to the timing of this, and I think you have done a nice job there. You've collaborated this, have you not, with the proxy season coming up?
That is exactly right. We aimed to get this information out in the hands of audit committee members in time for this season's proxy cycle so that they could consider these disclosures. And again, I want to go back to where you started, Ken, and that is that we're not suggesting that every audit committee do every one of these discussion points, but rather to look through the call to action, look through the examples that are in there, and see if that makes sense for that audit committee at that particular time. And going back to your other point about the effectiveness of audit committees, I wholeheartedly agree with you that audit committees are very effective, but that's because you and I understand what audit committees do and have a lot of interaction with audit committees.
Well, that's a good point.
And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out in the marketplace as to what audit committees do. And so this discussion, if an audit committee were to contemplate adding some of these discussions in their audit committee report, I think that that would help ease some of that misperception or misunderstanding or lack of knowledge that's out there.
So to sum up, I guess, no additional work, really. They're doing the work already. No additional responsibility because they're doing the work and set it forth already. And I think what this is a real opportunity for audit committees to build upon the level of trust that they have generated between audit committees generally, directors in specific, and investors in general and specific. And I think this is a great opportunity to take all that fine work that they've done and really bring it up to the next level.
Showcase it.
Yeah, it's a great word.
Showcase the work that they're
showcase
doing.
the work. That's a great way of putting it.
So one other thing I would ask audit committee members who are watching to consider is if you go to the auditcommitteecollaboration.org website, they can support this effort. And by clicking on a button, you can sign up to be a supporter of this effort. Doesn't mean that your audit committee in this audit committee report or any audit committee report is going to do all of these discussions, but it's just a notion or support by the audit committee that they agree with the concepts and the principles embedded in the call to action.
That's a very clever idea.
So
that way,
we
at the end of the day, you have some idea of just that kind of general support.
Exactly. And so we would encourage all audit committee members to please go and look at it, read the call to action, and then go to the website. Again, it's auditcommitteecollaboration.org, and click on there, and you can be a supporter. There are other tools there too. Another important point that is in the call to action that we haven't talked about today that I'll just mention briefly is audit committee evaluation or assessment of their external auditor. Again, another project that NACD collaborated on.
Exactly.
And it shows, again, to the audit committee, ways, simple ways. It's not a checklist. You're not obligated to do any of this, but ways that you might want to go about annually assessing your auditor so that you know that he or she and the firm is doing a good job year to year. So again, that's on the audit committee collaboration.
Well, that's a very important part. It's not part of the board vision today, but I wanted to take just a moment to remind everybody, and we'll be commenting on this. Evidently, ISS has a recent proposal out, again suggesting that ISS knows better than audit committees as to the tenure of audit firms. And we'll be doing some work on that and sending in some comment letters on that. But I think it's another indication of why these kinds of things are so important. Because the better people understand what it is that audit committees are doing, the less intrusion we have from, frankly,
outside
people
parties
who really don't know and seem to have some other bent on their way.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, this is the audit committee's responsibility.
It is.
Audit committees are fulfilling this responsibility. They're doing it well. They just need to talk about it so people understand that.
Makes sense to me. So, Cindy, thank you, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of Board Vision. Have a great day.